Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all rested and recharged after a bit of lunch. We had a bit of a gap there, so final stretch. It's always a good place to be on the last day, isn't it? So we've got some great conversation now. I'm not going to try and preempt any of it because I think the guests themselves are more than capable of doing that. So without further ado, apart from asking you to make sure you've got your phones turned off, Charles, over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We have Natalie Campbell, MBE, in the house. Welcome. And this is the first interview done since running for London Mayor this year. So I'm going to ask you a bit later about will you run again, will you go into politics, and all that, but we'll get there. For now, a quick introduction. Co-CEO of Bellu Water, a drinks company that puts people and the environment first. Bellu gives 100% of its profits to charity WaterAid.
Yes, we do.
And you've given how much to WaterAid?
5.8 million.
5.8 million?
Yeah.
That's amazing. And you'll see those in many of the very nice hotels and very nice restaurants as well. You did run for London Mayor. You got 47,815 votes this year, the highest of any independent that ran, and a third of the total that Liberal Democrats got, which is a huge, obviously, big party, and you as an independent. That is really amazing. You're Chancellor of the University of Westminster, and in 2020 awarded an MBE for your services to social entrepreneurship and business. And you're an advisory council member for the PwC. So we're going to discover today, how on earth are you achieving all these things? That is a lot of things to have achieved.
Great question.
So we're going to untangle that. And this is a condensed episode of the full interview we did about 6 months ago or so on How I Became, the podcast I co-host, where we shared your full life story. And today we'll get a little bit extra because this is post-election. So it's very exciting. If you have any questions, by the way, we will do a Q&A at the end. So if something comes to mind as we're chatting, note it down, and I'll come to you towards the end. OK. I want to start by talking about your grandfather. He watched on TV a very historical moment, one of the most famous speeches of all time. Can you set the scene? What was going on, and what was he watching?
So, I guess the broader context, I asked my granddad one day just about moments in history that he witnessed as a young man. And I said to him, where were you during the Martin Luther King march? Where were you during the I Have a Dream speech? He said, I was watching it. And what dawned on me in that moment was, in my granddad's lifetime, civil rights, that movement was at its height. So he grew up at a time where it was legal to ultimately pursue racist activity. And as much as, I guess, we all know that because you can look at the dates, the civil rights movement, the bill, that was the mid-1960s. We know this, that we know it wasn't a long time ago. To listen to him and put him in a moment where he actually watched it happen, for me, it was really powerful. And just over the years, something would pop into my mind, and I said, where were you when JFK was assassinated? Where were you during these moments? What was it like? And for me, it's always very sobering having those conversations with him, given the context of the world we're in now, because obviously there's so much going on, and it feels, because we have social media and access to world incidents and moments literally as they're happening, I guess it feels like we are possibly at one of the worst moments in history. But actually, if I track back to my granddad as a young man, I can't even begin to imagine how oppressive it must have felt for him. So that conversation really stayed with me.
And the reason we're speaking about your grandfather, you weren't raised by your parents. Why was that?
Yeah. So I was raised, but my parents had me really young, and my dad lived at home, and so he took me to live with him and his parents. So I ended up being raised by my grandparents in Willesden. They are immigrants from Jamaica, part of the Windrush generation, and so actually I think about it now because lots of people asked when I was running about my upbringing and my heritage and the dynamic of having very young parents. I mean, my dad is only 60, but then being raised by my grandparents who were a lot older and lived in a very different time, and therefore rules and I guess conservative grandparents with a very young liberal mum and dad. It was really interesting, and it shaped who I am. So a lot of the things that you read there, you know, my independent streak comes from sort of being in the middle of that upbringing, and I'm also the first grandchild. So I'm the eldest, and I'm the only child from my parents, but I have multiple siblings. I was trying to count how many, and I keep forgetting. I think I've got 6 or 7. So it shapes a lot of who I am.
And you mentioned your grandfather, your grandmother. Is there a moment who's also someone who's very influential in your life and shapes this character that has led you to achieve all these things? Is there a moment from your grandma that stands out from your childhood?
Yeah, so my maternal grandmother, I'd stay with her in the summer holidays, and I hated it at the time, but now I really appreciate it. But she would wake up every morning and pray for about an hour at the end of the bed. And she'd do the same thing at night, and we slept in the same bed. And listening to her pray for everyone. She'd also get into like the tea and the gossip as well. So, you know, someone might have been doing something they shouldn't be at the church, so she'd pray for them, so I'd get all of that gossip. But then she'd pray for all of the big things that are happening in the world. And she did it, excuse the pun, religiously, morning and night. She never not prayed. And that stayed with me from the way that I think about service, and I didn't realize how much it impacted me until a lot later.
This is one thing I've learned from getting to know you is you, and I think you've said, you'll see something that's not right in the world, and you just can't get it off your mind. You're like, that, we need to fix this. Hence maybe running for London Mayor, but we will get to that. Now, almost every single CEO I've interviewed have said, I didn't plan to be a CEO. That wasn't, I didn't like set out to be a CEO. I kind of, you know, got more senior in my career, and then it seemed like it was a possibility, and then I thought, oh, okay, yeah, I'll go for that. You're an exception. You're 15. You're listening to Destiny's Child, you know, can't think of Destiny's Child, TLC maybe, no, Scrubs.
A bit earlier, the earliest.
A bit earlier stuff.
Yeah.
And what are you thinking when you're listening to this music?
I'm going to be a CEO. So at 15, that's what I wanted to be. And you're right, you know, lots of people become CEOs or go along their leadership pathway because they've been promoted in their role. But for me, it was a very clear vision of, I am going to be a CEO. And I loved the energy of that whole movement and the fact that there were so many CEOs. And actually, when I was young, I didn't make the connection between the fact that they were black CEOs. It was what they were doing and what they were selling and the energy that I fell in love with.
And what's the movement you're talking about?
The 90s hip-hop movement.
Right.
So there were all of these record labels. Unfortunately, the movement is also now destroying itself because of the actions of individuals. But when I was growing up, like for me, I was all consumed by it. I'd go to the US and stand outside the offices of a lot of, you know, the rappers, and just, I wanted a job. I wanted to intern for them.
So you'd doorstep people and you'd say, can I intern?
Oh, totally.
Really?
Yeah, and I did it in the UK as well. So I interned at record labels before I got my national insurance number. I'd stuff envelopes.
This is all, you got your mindset, I'm going to be a record label, CEO of a hip-hop label one day.
Yeah.
Did you doorstep anyone we might know back then?
Not really, no.
It's more like people working there at the label.
No, so in terms of speaking to people, not names that we'd know, but I stood outside of the offices of Bad Boy and Rockefeller and those sorts of brands. And in the UK, I applied to all of the big record labels, and none of them would give me an internship. So I started working for some of the smaller ones, and there was an artist some people might remember called Sonique. She was part of a record label called Sirius Records, and they gave me my first shot in the industry. So I interned for them from the age of about 14 to 16. And they paid £5 an hour.
Look
Top
at
dollar
that.
back then.
Not too bad. What was her biggest track, Sonique?
I can sing it in my head. I won't sing it for you.
We'll have a live performance from Natalie after this. Coming soon.
Not.
So yeah, what we understand at this age, Natalie is a very determined young lady, 15, trying to make it happen. A little bit later, you go to Lancaster University, and this is while you're at university, you get into you start your journey of entrepreneurship, right? But it is a baptism of fire, to say the least. Yes. What happens?
Yeah. So I went to Lancaster, and I chose Lancaster because it was one of the few universities at that time that offered an undergraduate degree in entrepreneurship. And I got to Lancaster, really small town, and I was like, what's missing? And what was missing was R&B. Well, that's what I thought was missing.
Okay.
So I started doing club nights, and I'd bring DJs up from London to play in Lancaster. Lancaster wasn't necessarily a place that knew it was missing R&B, so it was an uphill battle to get people to enjoy R&B, but I persevered nonetheless. And we did other things. So we did. I had an events company, CC UK. And we did things like Lancaster Idol, so we worked with local clubs, and we did all of this stuff, and it was loads of fun, and I had a small team that I paid. And then I was like, right, I've earned my stripes. I had, back then, banks used to have relationship managers, so when you opened a business bank account, there was a person that you spoke to, and you could tell them about your business ambitions, and they'd build your business plan with you. And so I said to my relationship manager at the time, I want to do something substantial. I think I want to go into retail. I was looking at coffee shops as an option. Again, I'm old, so this was before coffee was a thing. The only place to get coffee in Lancaster at the time was Costa, and it was a franchise in a hairdresser's. There was no Starbucks, there was no Cafe Nero, there was no boutique coffee. Like, people drank Nescafe, quick mix. And in London, there was a coffee chain called Coffee Republic, and that was the biggest chain at the time. And the founders of Coffee Republic wrote a book called Anyone Can Do It. So Bobby and Sarah wrote this book, and I read it and basically followed the blueprint for building my own business as a coffee entrepreneur. And I had this plan all set to go. Went home of the Easter of my second term at university, so this must have been the March, came back, and a Cafe Nero had opened in Lancaster. And I was like, that's it, the dream's over, because you can't have more than one coffee shop in a town.
You thought back then?
That's what,
yes.
Clearly I was wrong. So I was like, right, what else do I know? And retail, as in clothing, was the other thing that I knew, because I'd worked for Morgan, which was a high street brand, from the age of 16. So I ended up opening a Morgan franchise in Lancaster, and I pretty much, between the April and the September of that year, went through the process of the business plan, securing a lease for 10 years, £100,000, and a yes from Morgan, and opening a couple of weeks before I turned 21, and as I was going into my final year of university.
Wow. I mean, 21, that is young to be opening a franchise for a clothing store. It's pretty good, especially...
In my head, it was old.
Really? You were like, I'm behind?
Oh, totally.
Oh, wow.
I was behind schedule. I was supposed to have made it at 16.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
That is a lot of pressure. Does anybody remember Morgan clothes shops?
Heart logo.
Oh, yeah, we've got some Morgan fans in the house. Wow. So, yeah, then you launch it, big ambitions, right, 21 and behind, this needs to be a success, so I need to get this going. Boom, what happens?
So I was doing that, final year of university, just about passed. I submitted my business plan for Morgan as my dissertation. I mean, I love Lancaster because they basically just said, you didn't come here to study, you came here to start a business.
Cool.
We'll support you to graduate. And Morgan was going great guns. We were making loads of money. For me, it was really easy because I worked for them from the age of 16. I knew all of the operations. And I decided that I would leave a team running the store. I wanted to have more Morgans across the Northwest, but I wanted to go back to London, and I saw a great role basically evangelizing the idea of being a graduate entrepreneur. And it was part of a government campaign in the early 2000s called Make Your Mark. So I started doing that role, and I was in London on the tube one day, and I opened the Evening Standard, and I saw a headline that said 700 jobs go as Morgan declares bankruptcy.
Oh dear.
And
this
in
is
that
not what you want to
moment-
know when you own a franchise, that the company's going to bankruptcy.
Exactly.
Okay.
And anyone that's dealt with a company that's gone into administration, there's no one to call. No one will speak to you. So I had a shop and a business that I actually couldn't operate, and I would have been 22, 23 at the time. So this is the point where you realize that you don't know what you don't know. I did not know what to do. There were no books on this. And back, the internet wasn't really a thing. You could go on to Ask Jeeves and wait for the dial-up to catch up, but there was no information on, what you actually do.
It's like, what's that Mike Tyson thing? You think you know how to box until you get punched in the mouth. This is your punch in the mouth moment.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So, I was upset for a day. I think I probably spent a day in bed, and then went back to Lancaster and said, right, I'm going to take all of the money that I've got and I'm going to rebrand the store. I got a letter saying I couldn't sell any of the stock, so I just had it all in the stock room, and I spent all of my working capital on rebranding the store in a week.
Ah.
And it didn't work.
Oh, it didn't work. So you changed the name, you changed the look and everything.
I changed the name. Luckily, there was a trade show like this, and I came down to London, and I pretty much bought enough stock to be able to, fit out the shop. Repainted. So literally, I had tradespeople going in, doing all of this stuff because you had to there was a lot of red. It was a bespoke fit, so I had to change all of that. And I think I spent about £120,000.
120 grand, and you were 23. Wow.
Opened the doors like the following Monday, and people just didn't get it. They were like, "This was a Morgan a couple of days ago, and now it's DM." And even though the product sort of looks the same, it wasn't the label, it wasn't the brand, and that pretty much was it. And
wow.
So I basically had to liquidate the company. And when I went to my accountant, they said, you're young enough to make yourself bankrupt. And I knew then that it wasn't a good idea. And I said, you know what, I'm actually going to pay this off. So I then took on £50,000 worth of debt myself.
Right.
Which meant I had to work even harder because I had all of this debt to pay off. And I made a commitment that I'd be debt-free by the age of 30. And so I basically hauled ass and worked 10,000 jobs and set up side hustles to pay off all of this debt. In hindsight, it was the best thing ever because it built my entrepreneurial muscle. But it was more of a necessity being an entrepreneur at that point because I had to pay this money off.
How did you feel at that time? Because you were almost like a poster person for entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. And you were having to go around preaching the values of how great it is to be an entrepreneur.
Yep.
And while you were in debt and going through this,
I'm an honest person, so I'd stand on stage and say, it's absolutely the right thing for you to do to graduate university and start a business. But I must tell you that I'm in the process of actually liquidating and closing my own business. And it was basically therapy. I'd just stand on stage and be like, this did this thing, and then go away and fix it, and then go off to the next university and have the conversation. So actually, it was really useful to be doing that at the time.
Yeah, and fair play, because it's easier to talk about it now because you're like, everyone knows. Well, that was a challenging moment, but you've gone on to great things. Mm-hmm. You're a successful person. But when you're in it, to talk about it is tough.
Yeah. But I think the key thing I want to say about that moment, though, when I was going to universities, and speaking to students, now no one thinks twice about starting a business or a side hustle. But then, when I went to universities, they would say, well, we don't get people ready, or students ready to be entrepreneurs. We get them ready for the milk round. We want them to go and work in the Big Four. We want them to go and be in the professions. So they didn't get entrepreneurship. And actually, I'm so pleased about where we are now and the culture of entrepreneurship that we have. But it wasn't that long ago when it wasn't the norm.
And you went through quite a tough time when you were kind of working your way out of that situation. I think you spent a lot of time, nights, at home, you saving every penny, and must have been pretty lonely. For anybody who is going through something challenging, they're going through a really tough time. How did you cope with that when you're in the middle of this tough time? What's your advice?
So my favourite, an additional bit of context. I'm a working class girl from northwest London. And my friends and the people around me weren't doing the things that I was doing. Most of my friends had babies at 16. So I was with my friends, and back then when you had a baby you got housing, so we'd be sort of either I'd be at their mother and baby accommodation or at their temporary accommodation, and they had no money. I at least had a job and a little bit of money. And our saying became, you can't be more broke than broke. And we'd say it and we'd just laugh and we'd make do with what we had. And being raised by my Jamaican grandparents, you made do with stuff. So I can make a wicked meal out of a can of tuna. I can do amazing things with rice and pasta. So we had enough, but I always knew it was temporary. And I'm going to jump forwards to the story. To run for Mayor of London, I took out a loan for £25,000. And given what I said about debt and being debt-free, I didn't want to be in debt. I spent a long time avoiding any form of debt other than a mortgage. And what I said to myself, it's temporary. You'll pay it off. It's a chapter for the book, which is another thing that we always say. It's something you have to go through.
So you kind of, you went a lot, you got in with your community, your friends, your family, and that gave you that sense of I'm not alone going through this. It's going to be okay, which I think is always good advice. If you're having a tough time, spend time with friends, spend time with family. Just remind yourself that you're not alone, because that can be the thing that really
go back to your foundations. And I guess we have to appreciate that not everyone has the same foundations, but I always think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As long as you've got a safe space to base yourself, to be still, as long as you can eat good food, and like I said, you can do amazing things with a can of tuna, and you've got people around you that love you, and a sense of perspective. Perspective is so important. I think a lot of us take ourselves very seriously. And the reality is that we can afford to find joy and to take ourselves a lot less seriously.
Great advice. Well, this is where the turnaround begins. You launched a business in 2010, a very good company, which ran for 10 years, include clients like Virgin, Marks & Spencer's, Channel 4. And so tell us about how did you turn things around? And that really was the takeoff point for a lot of the things you've gone on to do.
Yeah. So because I had all of this debt to pay, I basically crafted my portfolio career out of that. And I sort of had a day job, I was consulting, and I got a bursary to do a master's. So Channel 4 paid for my bursary to study journalism at City University. And I went off to Washington, D.C. To work the news desk there for a summer. And I saw a job at the organization that I'd worked for, the Make Your Mark organization, to head up a program running or setting up a new digital platform for Virgin Media to support young entrepreneurs. And again, the context of time, part of the program was giving all of the entrepreneurs a flip camera, a netbook, and access to broadband, because iPhones didn't exist.
Is this 2010 now? This is before
Yeah,
that. Sounds very 2010 words.
No, it would have been before 2010.
Okay, right.
So sort of 2008, 2009.
Internet's still making weird noises when you log in.
I'm wondering how popular even Google was then.
Right.
I don't know that it was the primary platform
Yeah.
even then. So I'd basically serendipity at play created a role doing this thing in technology with a brand that later became my client. And so I went back to London, started this role. It was amazing. We built this platform to support young entrepreneurs. People like Benazir Barlet were our first pioneers.
Cool. And
the idea was that we wanted entrepreneurs to document their startup journey through video on a flip cam that they uploaded, and the upload would sometimes take 3 or 4 hours.
Wow.
Again, the internet wasn't like it is now. And there was a change in government. So we went from a Labour government that was pushing this agenda to a Conservative government that removed the funding. And that is how I started A Very Good Company. I took Virgin Media in as my first client. And the reason A Very Good Company was called A Very Good Company was that we wanted to work with businesses that really focused on social innovation, doing things for people, doing things for the environment, but in a human-centered way. So that's how the agency started.
So this business was a great success. It obviously opens a lot of doors,
Yep.
gets you into a lot of rooms, you build your network, you're learning about business, having a really great time. You've held a lot of positions on boards, you've advised government. What are some of the ones you're most proud of? And for anybody in the room who's like, I'd love to advise government, I'd love to get on boards,
Yep.
how do you do it?
You just start. So I joined my first board at 23. There was an organisation called the British Youth Council, and it was a youth voice organisation that supported young people to think about politics. I went from the British Youth Council to an organisation called Unlimited. It's called Unlimited, the Foundation for Social Entrepreneurs. Unlimited has an endowment of £100 million, and it gives grants to social entrepreneurs. So over the years, I was going from a £2 million turnover organisation to an organisation that had an endowment of 100 million. And then I moved to become, or at the same time, I became a board member for what is now the National Lottery Communities Fund, which gives away £1 billion a year. And all of this was in my early 20s. And it was called Big Lottery back then. I applied 3 times and I was rejected twice. And I was like, this organisation needs me around the table. And
This is the National Lottery, it's part of the National Lottery?
Yeah. So it gets its funding from the National Lottery and then gives it away in grants. So
Got you.
there's the community fund, does all of the community work. There's a sport fund, there's an arts fund. So I was on the community fund board. And it's a public appointment. So you are appointed by, I think that appointment is by the Prime Minister. And public appointments come with very specific parameters for their paid roles. There is a website called Public Appointments where you find these roles. And I say this to people all of the time. Like, most people don't know that you can just apply for these roles. You can apply to be a non-exec of a government agent, of a government body, a government department, but also government agencies, just by going to this website.
I'm writing it down now. Public appointments.
Public Appointments.
There you go. Be on a board, public appointments.
Led by the Cabinet Office. And there are loads of appointments on there across all parts of government. So there was that. And it's not easy, hence I applied 3 times, and on the 3rd try, I got it. But I was very clear on that 3rd try why they needed me. So that was a learning curve for me.
If you'd gone bankrupt
Wouldn't have been able to do it.
You wouldn't have been able to. So that little voice in your head back then that said, don't do
Exactly.
it, allowed you to do that. Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah. And again, I think if we listen to our inner voices and sort of the consciousness that we have, it tells us things for a reason. And in that moment when I said to myself, I'm going to pay this debt off, it was clearly the inner voice saying there are things that you are going to go on to do that you won't be able to do if you choose this other path. So generally, I just applied. So what's, I guess, more unique is that I was doing all of these roles in tandem. And because I was running my own business, I had the time and the flexibility to do it. So that was the sort of the board side of things. My favorite role was probably being a civil service commissioner. So the Civil Service Commissioner, it was an appointment by the Queen, and my role was to recruit the most senior people into the civil service. So permanent secretaries, director generals, and directors. And I call the people that run the civil service architects of society. And the reason why that role was so important for me was that we should know who runs the country. And we think it's politicians, but there are people that do jobs day in, day out that are actually the architects of how we live. They are the architects of how we pay tax. They are the architects of how roads are built. They're the architects of how buildings are built. They are the architects of who's homeless and who's not. And in that role, in appointing those people, so they have to go through a competition, and as a regulator, my role was to make sure the competitions didn't have political interference. You get to sit in front of people and ask them who they are and understand their intent and understand how good they are at deciding whether or not that road should be built or that road should be built, or we're going to invest X million in ending homelessness or not. And then I started working with the mayor's office, so I sat on two of the current mayor's boards. One of them was the London Economic Action Partnership, so it's the entity that does all of the economic planning and funding distribution for London, and I sat next to him at pretty much every single meeting. And then I sat on another one of his boards, so OPDC, which is basically designing London's largest new district in West London. And again, the power around that table, you are deciding what building is going to be built in the next 30 years. The conversations being around that table meant that I could challenge this conversation. I was about to say Chatham House, but clearly it's not. I'm going to say it anyway. So I was around the table, and a team from Network Rail and TfL were talking about the new Old Oak Common station. And this station is not going to be built for 10 years. It's a hole in the ground. And they basically said, this station is not going to be accessible. I was like, sorry, what?
So no, wheelchairs can't get there.
So platforms are not going to be accessible. You're like, can everyone hear this conversation? I'm like, why? It's not even out of the ground yet. Surely if we can put a man on the moon, and women on the moon, we can make this station accessible.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh. I was like, we need to do this. That's why it's important to be around the table, because everyone sorts of nods. And the people that suggested it clearly were not in a wheelchair and had never pushed a buggy.
Yeah.
And. So that conversation, but also saying, will there be toilets on the platform? These trains are coming in from long distances. Anyone that's gone into a station and wanted to find a toilet, and again, from an accessibility perspective, you shouldn't have to walk for 10, 15 minutes to find a toilet. Let's put these things into plan. So when I say architects of society, there are people that make these decisions all of the time, and just being around that table, even if it's 4 hours every 4 months, you can actually make significant change.
I'm starting to get a sense of why you ran for London Mayor. Something tells me I did that. 2020, Bellew Water give you a call and say, hey, Natalie, can you be our CEO? How it goes down?
I saw the role advertised. So before I joined Bellew, I was working for the Royal Family. So I was the Director of Insight and Innovation for the Royal Family, and I helped the Sussexes set up their foundation. And as I was doing that, I was thinking about what was going to be next in my career. And then I saw the role at Bellew and applied. And what I loved about Bellew, I knew the founder, but it was the perfect balance of a commercial business that was really strong from a revenue perspective, but gave all of its profits away. And not all of its profits, sort of. Our accounts are audited, you can see the P&L, every penny is then given away towards trade. And it was perfect for me because I love the fact I wake up every day and I get to make a difference but I also get to push the boundaries of what business could be within society. I get to push the boundaries of how business could operate if it was putting the environment first.
I'm going to skip forward a little bit for time. So Belly Water has done brilliantly while you've been there, a very successful company.
Well, we had the pandemic. It pretty much didn't do very well, and we had to bring it back from the brink.
Yes.
That's all I'll say about
You
that.
can hear about that in the podcast, actually, so you want that bit. You wake up one day and you go, I'm going to run for London Mayor. Can you give us a taste, for those who haven't run for Mayor before, probably most people, what's it like emotionally when, like, I guess every day you're just having to get up, go and give talks, meet people, you know, I don't know what you're doing, to be honest. What's it like emotionally to go through? Just give us a taste.
Well, just to say, neither did I. There is no blueprint to run for mayor. You literally, I woke up at 5 a.m. in the morning and I wrote a list of things that I thought you would do. Luckily for me, I've run businesses before. So I applied a business blueprint to running for mayor. Sonakshi's here. Sonakshi was in my campaign team and now also works for Blue. And, you know, it was insane. She saw the insanity. There was
How long from the day you decided you were going to run to the election?
a year.
Oh, a year.
Well, separately. So a year, I tried to get on the long list for a party, on the short list for a party, didn't. And then I had 6 months from the moment I said I'm going to run as an independent to the day of the election.
Oh, gosh. So it's 6 months of pretty heavy, hardcore working.
Yeah.
The day of the election, did you sleep much the night before?
I did, actually, because everything was done. By that point, there's nothing you can do. The votes have been cast. You know, we left everything on the field, like everything. I have not worked as long a day as the days I was working running for mayor in a long time. But there was so much. There was a lot of joy to it. There was absolute insanity to it. There was a lot of adrenaline and dopamine, and I knew I was alive, put it that way.
That's always good.
And we should all do hard things. Just because they're hard, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do them. And that for me was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It challenged me because I had to do things that I didn't want to do. So I didn't want to have a loan at a rate of 7.9% APR that I'm paying off for the next 5 years. But it was important. It was the only way that I was going to get on the ballot. I didn't want to raise
10 grand to get on the list?
10,000 to be on the ballot.
Yeah.
Well, there's lots of things you have to do. You have to run around London and get 330 signatures from people. So 10 signatures from every borough in London, so 330 if you include the City of London Corporation. That nearly broke us. And then you pay £10,000 then to get onto the ballot. You pay another £10,000 to get into the booklet. And then I had about £5,000 to pay interns and get collateral and materials. And this is against campaign teams, like, you know, the mayor has millions, or the parties have millions. They don't put their own money on the ballot to run. They don't have to get the nominations themselves. So they just show up as the candidate and don't do very much. But all of the independents, they have to do that work themselves and financially, generally, support themselves. Parties like Reform, if you're in a party, you don't do any of that work yourself. If you're independent, you do it all yourself.
How many votes did Reform get?
76,000. But in some of the votes, so the count was actually here. Some of the team that saw me on the count day are here as well, so the counts were here. And in some areas, I got more votes than the Lib Dems and Reform.
Wow. So how do you find out the results?
You sit there and watch them count. They start reading it out. So there'll be sort of a table and a stand. They've counted all of the forms, and then they go through your name and they say the number that you got within each constituent group.
Oh, where's that? Where do you do that? Where are you when this is happening?
So there's a hotel down the road called the Good Hotel. We had a room there, and we were watching it on TV. But you can be in the room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't win and become London Mayor.
No.
I mean, considering you put 25 grand in and other parties we're spending at least in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
It's an amazing achievement what you did to get a third of the votes, as I said, as the Lib Dems did, the highest independent. And from what I could see, thanks to ChatGPT telling me about other independents, you are up there with one of the highest independents, at least in the last 25 years, from what I can see.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I'm not satisfied. The goal was 1.5 million, and the goal was to be Mayor of London. That was the goal. But I recognise, and it was someone else that said this to me, to secure a 2% market share in 6 months of £25,000, isn't easy. And I proved to myself that I still have my entrepreneurial muscles. The joints might hurt a little, but the entrepreneurial muscle still works, and that's important.
So now we're all thinking, we're all wondering, this is what we want to know. Are you going to go again?
I don't know. Immediately after the election, I said, yes, I'm going to run again in 4 years. And then when they called the general election, I said, I'm going to run as an MP. I do not want to be an MP. MPs don't have any power. This is really important. The only power an MP has is advocacy and writing letters. They don't have any budgetary power. They do not have any regulatory power. They cannot create any infrastructure. So you can't really be a good independent MP because you have no levers. That's why being in a party is important, and the voting and the whips is really important. So if you actually want to create change, you need to be in local politics. So I don't know. It's an expensive endeavor, and based on what I learned about the system, lots of things would need to change in order for an independent to win. It's not impossible, but it's harder than hard.
Sounds it. So to be determined. We'll stay watching and see what happens.
Yeah.
And maybe in 4 years you've got some voters here today. We don't know. We'll see. Questions. Does anybody have any questions for Natalie that you've written down? We've got one over here. Yes, we'll start with you. I think we've got a mic coming over.
Hello. Okay. First of all, your story is really inspiring, so thank you for sharing. When you said that the system is set up so it's really hard for independents to succeed, did that dampen your spirit? And did that make you feel like, oh, what's the point? And have you got over it? How did you get over it?
Say that again?
How did you get over that that feeling, if you had that?
Yeah. So in it, I knew it was hard. And I woke up every day and lots of people just tell me I was shit. So that is the reality of doing this. And lots of people say you're not going to win. And lots of people would say this is absolutely impossible. And I was like, I do not care about anything you're saying. 1.5 million votes, Mayor of London on this day. So sometimes you just have to lean into your convictions. And I knew the system wasn't fit or wouldn't work for independents. I didn't realize how much it was self-interested. That's the key thing. I thought there'd be at least an element of fairness, even on the part of the media, and there just wasn't. And I was actively kept out of events. There was an event that I sat at. I was one of, so the main candidates didn't show up. The mayor did not show up to a main hustings, and I had to sit in the audience and watch the debate happen with empty chairs. Like that, I didn't bank on. Really? But did it dampen my spirits in it? No. Rage and fury is a really good motivator. Coming out of it, though, I am totally salty, and that is why I don't know if I'm going to run again.
Makes sense. Any other questions? Oh, a couple there.
Hi, thanks so much for sharing. So you said you started off the music industry. I'm just interested to know what made you decide to step away from it.
I looked at a system that I would never thrive in. So I knew really young that, being working class, young, black and female at the time, the industry was not run by anyone that looked like me, other than sort of the hip-hop labels in the US. So I saw that and I was like, it's not for me. And it's the same reason I never went into a corporate job earlier on in my career. My goal is always, would I want to lead this organization? And if you look at the leadership and you go, probably not. So that was why.
Do you still have the ambition inside you that one day you'd love to run a label?
No.
No.
Well, I think that it's completely changed. You don't need to run a label. You can be an amazing independent artist and use all of the tools, like the tools that are on display now, and do well.
Cool. I think we had another. Whoa, something's going on there. Another question there.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I think it's so inspiring what you've done. Amazing. I was just wondering, while I was listening to your sort of origin story, it feels like you talk a lot about systems and you kind of bought into the franchise at Morgan, and then you went off and you did it on your own and that didn't work, or whatever, but it propelled you to where you are, and then you moved, can't remember where, but then you went to Virgin.
Just hold the mic a little bit closer,
sorry, I sound really loud to myself. And then you went to Virgin and then you kind of did it there. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like actually trying to run from there is you buying into another system and then just finding another way to do what you really want to do yourself? And what is it that you ultimately want to achieve, I guess?
So yes, the things that I wanted to tackle, so I know we're out of time, but really quickly, there was a case called Child Q. So a 15-year-old girl was strip searched at school on her period by the Metropolitan Police without any adult supervision. And ultimately, I was like, why are children being strip searched? And the case was that a teacher said they smelt marijuana on this child. Smelling marijuana on a child at 15 and ended up strip searching them completely naked, alone in a toilet. I'm like, that shouldn't happen. No. And so I went along the process of trying to ban the use of strip search in schools and then banning it for children, full stop. The mayor wouldn't endorse it, so I was like, I'm going to take your job. That was the goal. Then there were other things like homelessness. Homelessness, especially youth homelessness, is a political choice. We could end youth homelessness in London, but the mayor has chosen not to. Because other candidates made pledges to end it, he made it a pledge to end rough sleeping by a certain date. None of that work has started yet. So there were very specific things that I put in my manifesto that I wanted to change, that I still want to change, and actually through business I can probably influence. But the Child Q one for me is one that I will continue to work on regardless.
Okay, that is time. Please, round of applause for Natalie Campbell and everything you've achieved. Thank you for joining us. I think we'll head out there. If anyone wants to chat after, we'll just be outside the exit. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.